State of Affairs is pleased to welcome Ralph LaRossa, COO and President, PSEG Power. Good to see you, Ralph.
Good to see you, Steve. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has. Let's put this in context. And in just a few minutes, we'll talk about the future of energy, big picture. But let's talk about what's going on. You guys have 3 nuclear plants in South Jersey. There's a $300 million state subsidy on the line as it relates to those plants. Why is that so relevant to the future of energy in the state?
So I take you back a little bit in time. We, as you know, run a number of plants up and down the New Jersey Turnpike and some other states as well. But as it relates to the state of New Jersey, we, in the past, had 2 coal plants that were in New Jersey, one in the Trenton area, one up in Jersey City. And those plants were closed 2 years ago. And we didn't raise any issues. We didn't come to policymakers. We didn't talk at all about the need to keep those plants open because they really didn't fit in the policy of the state of New Jersey. These 3 plants, and the reason that they're so important to us—
They're nuclear plants.
These 3 nuclear plants in New Jersey are important because they're very consistent with the environmental policy of the state of New Jersey, which is to have 0 emissions from the power plants that generate power to feed the residents of New Jersey. That's our policy. That's where we've been heading as a state. And these 3 plants are so key to that because they provide over 40% of the power that comes into New Jersey and over 90% of the power that has 0 emissions to it. So if we lose 90% of the power that's right. 0 emissions, that's a big impact on the state of New Jersey.
But why the state? By the way, let me disclose a couple things. One, PSEG is a major underwriter of the work that we do at the Caucus Educational Corporation, and obviously, as you watch NJTV News, they're a major underwriter of the news as well. Here's the thing that's interesting to me. You've got the ratepayer advocate and some others who are saying, PSEG, they don't need a $300 million subsidy. They're flush, you say?
All right, well, what I say is that you don't look at no company looks at one individual asset and say, well, we're going to keep that asset running. If the Dunkin' Donuts that's down the street here
right.
closes, it's because
we're downtown Newark. Go ahead.
There's not enough customers going to the Dunkin' Donuts.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that Dunkin' Donuts has to subsidize those assets and those stores that they have that aren't making any money. These plants are not making any money, and they're not making any money because we're so close to the Marcellus Shale that exists.
Put that. You're not going to open up this Pandora's box. The Marcellus Shale is
so Marcellus Shale is a gas supply, is a gas reserve natural gas reserve that was found in Pennsylvania, and so people have been producing natural gas for the last 10 years, 15 years or so from that reserve, and as a result, they've been driving down the price of power. And as they drive down the price of power, these nuclear plants, which have a lot more expense associated with them, they tend to become out of market because we bid every day into the marketplace.
You make it sound like you can't compete in that environment.
It's tough to compete, but it's the same thing for solar, and it's the same thing for wind. So we look at any of these 0 emission sources for energy, and we say as a state, from a policy standpoint, we want to support those because we believe in having 0 emissions in the state of New Jersey from our power plants.
But Ralph, what's so interesting is nuclear is described by many as a clean source of energy.
Right.
There are others who say it's dangerous, close them down from an environmental point of view. It seems like there's a disconnect.
So
is there a disconnect in the minds of some?
And in my opinion, there is a disconnect in the minds of some. So let's look at Oyster Creek as an example. Oyster Creek just closed. Recently. I think it was last October or November. It was in the state of New Jersey. There were concerns there from an environmental standpoint, not about the danger of it, but the impact on the Barnegat Bay. So there was a decision made to close it. But what has happened since Oyster Creek closed? Since Oyster Creek closed, all of that power that was generated by that nuclear plant is now being generated by gas-fired plants in the state of New Jersey.
Why is that relevant to consumers?
Because it gets back to our policy being to have a green state that wants to have their power generated from 0 emissions generators. So it'll be from solar, from wind, from nuclear over time. We'll phase out. That's the policy. 0 by 2030, 0 by 2050. That's the policy of the state and this region, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. It's all about reducing carbon emitting generation.
So here's the thing. On April the 18th, the Board of Public Utilities, they regulate a lot of industries, including your industry. There's a vote that's being taken on this subsidy. If that $300 million subsidy is not in place, by the way, we'll have others who have a different perspective on this, on State of Affairs as well. What happens? Well, you said you're going to close.
Yeah, the plants close, and it's terrible for the economy in South Jersey. It's one of the major employers. Over 6,000 employees at different times are employed down at that plant. It's bad for the state from an emission standpoint. but it's a decision that's made by, again, policymakers. We only raised this issue. This wasn't about us making a money grab. This was only a question about whether or not we wanted to meet those environmental policies. And we thought it was important, and so we generated the conversation. Took place over the last 12 months. At different times, it's been pretty heated.
Where's the governor on this?
Well, the governor signed the bill.
Signed the bill?
There was a bill that allowed, legislation that was put in place that allowed the BPU to make this decision. Because without that legislation being put in place, the BPU wouldn't have had the ability.
And the Senate President on this as well supportive?
The Senate President supportive, Speaker Coughlin, they've all been supportive of it. It's all passed, all the chambers. But now we have this last piece, which is the BPU looking at our books, our financial books, and saying, hey, are these plants really making money or losing money? We've provided a full truckload of information. And so they're in that process right now of going through that.
We're going to see what happens on the 18th of April with the Board of Public Utilities. I assure you that not just our operation will cover it, State of Affairs. I assure you NJTV News will be covering it as well. And again, people with different perspectives will have on it. How about 2 minutes, Ralph? Future of energy in the state. I mean, you've been touching on it already by talking about wind, solar, and other sources. Are you optimistic about the future of energy in the state of New Jersey? Yeah,
no, I am. I think so. Many times I've been on this program in the past and talked about the utility role. And in those conversations, I would tell you from a resiliency and reliability standpoint, it was all of the above. We wanted to do everything we could to keep the lights on.
Particularly after Sandy. We talked a lot about it.
A lot after Sandy. So now I've moved over to the power side of the business, and now it's the same story, though. It's all of the above. So when we look at what we need to keep the power generated in the state at a reasonable price for customers, we look at all of the above. So there is a little bit of natural gas left in the state. 50% of it is in some, that 40% I said from the nuclear plants. The rest of it is mostly done by gas generation. But the goal is to phase that out over time. We have gas generation plants, but now we're looking at what does that mean to our fleet over the long term, right? 2030, 2050. I hope we're here talking about it in 2030,
but you 2050. Need to be looking at that,
but
though.
We're looking at it now, right? Because that's the long-term goal. So what are we looking to do? Maybe even move into offshore wind, right? So we've had conversations with some companies about offshore wind. That's one of the next technologies that's coming to generate power, and we're taking a look at that as an opportunity for us to continue to be a supplier.
Everything on the table, but the 18th matters. With April 18th, BPU matters, that vote.
Matters more to the state now from an environmental standpoint than ever before.
Ralph LaRossa is the president as well as the chief operating officer of PSEG Power. I want to thank you for joining us. We appreciate it, Ralph.
Thanks, Steve.
All the best.
Thanks.
This is State of Affairs. I'm Steve Adubato. We're coming to you from the NJTV studios in Newark. We'll be right back.
State of Affairs with Steve Adubato is a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation, celebrating over 30 years of broadcast excellence. State of Affairs with Steve Adubato is brought to you from the Agnes Veris NJTV studio at 2 Gateway. Funding has been provided by the Turl Fund, supporting right from the start NJ, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the New Jersey Education Association, NJM Insurance Group, Berkeley College, Wells Fargo, and by Summit Medical Group.